Okay, I hope you all enjoyed the Bible Project's presentation and synopsis overview of Hosea. They have little 7 to 10 minute videos for every book of the Bible. Granted, some of the books require 2 videos, but this is a great view of Hosea. The only thing I would say that I would want to point out is that they said Hosea ministered for 25 years, and I'm thinking rather Hosea was one of the longest working prophets that there are of all of them. It could very well be that he worked for 50 to 70 years. And so he might have even seen the fulfillment of his prophecy as far as when it came to the scattering and the carrying away of Israel, where it's no longer a nation, but rather a people scattered among the other nations. One of the reasons we may not know much about the prophets is because we have a tendency to look at the Old Testament as if Genesis to Malachi was one linear chronological story. And after we get to Song of Solomon, we think, oh, that was so precious, wasn't that sweet? And we read through Isaiah because it's such an evangelical, I was going to call it a gospel, it's the original gospel. It was so focused towards the Messiah that we can see Jesus in all of it, that after that we get bogged down. We don't even know who are the Chaldeans, what is Babylon, who is Assyria, we don't even know what's going on. And so we just like read through it hastily, get a few nuggets here and there, and move on to the New Testament. But it's to recognize that it's not one chronological line from Genesis to Malachi, but rather there's a parallel. It breaks off right about at the time of 1 Samuel. It breaks off into 2 stories. You have all the history of what was going on, 1st and 2nd Samuel, 1st and 2nd Kings, 1st and 2nd Chronicles, Ezra, Esther, Nehemiah. And then the top one, it gives you all the commentary, God's commentary on what he's thinking of this history. And so it's almost like you got to read the 2 together. You could get a book like this, the Chronological Study Bible. I don't know if that's coming in backwards, but there's a lot of chronological Bibles out there that will put the prophets that are collected at the end of the Old Testament where they belong in the history that's given in 1st and 2nd Kings, 1st and 2nd Chronicles. Hosea belongs in the northern kingdom. Oh boy, what's the northern kingdom? After the 3 kings, Saul, David, and Solomon, that had a united kingdom, the kingdom split. Rehoboam was doing some trash talking, and that trash talking caused the kingdom to divide up. He's like, yo, my pinky is bigger than your whole body. I could take you down with one hand tied behind my back, you know what I'm saying? And you're going to pay taxes to me because I got a lavish lifestyle to take care of. And they didn't want to hear it, and so they broke off. 10 tribes broke off to the north, and that became known as the kingdom of Israel. 2 tribes stayed with the line of David in the south, and that became known as the kingdom of Judah. Israel to the north lasted for 210 years. They had 19 kings during that 210 years, and they were all bad. Even the one whom really you could say God gave them the kingdom, handed it to them on a silver platter. He say, here you go, follow me. But the first thing he did, because he was frightened of the southern kingdom, because he was afraid that his citizens would return and follow the line of David, he set up 2 alternative places of worship. One in Bethel, the house of God, and one in Dan to the north, so that the southern and northern kingdom, people could go do their worship there. Well, this fellow, where did the first king come from? He came from Egypt. He had spent time in Egypt, and while he was down there, he got the bright idea. I'll tell you what, I'm going to make some golden calves. That's something the Israelites are familiar with. I want to make golden calves, and I'm going to attach the name Yahweh over the top of it. And I'll just say, these are just here to help you worship, so it's all right. And so he set up these 2 alternative temple areas, Bethel and Dan, with golden calves, but he still maintained the name of Yahweh. He simply wanted to keep his citizens on his turf and his side and not lose them to Judah or Jerusalem. And so that is how the northern kingdom was conceived. Yes, it was granted by God as a judgment to some of the lavishness and greediness and exploitations of Solomon, but Jeroboam did not do well. Jeroboam the first did not do well. He conceived it in idolatry, setting up these alternatives to what God wanted. And Israel followed that. What we start in compromise here may end up in full bloom in our children or our children's children, or in our doctrine later on in life, where we've just gone off the deep end in doctrine, you might say. And so Jeroboam allowed for it, and Israel continued down that spiral until you get to the time of Hosea, where it's nearing the end. You get to Jeroboam the second, you might. And Jeroboam the second is doing well as far as the Dow Jones and the NASDAQ is concerned. They're like, hey, we are doing great. Look at this. Dow Jones is up. Looks like we're reaching an all-time high. This would be a good time to make your investments and buy a house and get your mansion. And everybody was doing that. They were living in wealth. Now, I said everybody. That was hyperbolically speaking, because someone had to do the labor. And so there was a lot of exploitation, a lot of greed, a lot of worshiping to other gods, thinking that it would help them. There's a syncretism of going on. Like, we can add Baal to our religion of Yahweh, and Ashtoreth, and Chemish, and Moloch. They were adding all these other gods to Yahweh, thinking the more the merrier. We're a pluralistic society. There's no distinction. But they found themselves kind of spiraling downward. Greed does that to a person. Wealth does that to a person. David prays. He says, Lord, don't make me so poor that I have to steal bread, and don't make me so rich that I forget you. Well, it was at this time. Yeah, if it wasn't enough that they're setting up these alternative idols and worship places and high places, then they start getting wealthy and start being blessed by God, and they start saying, look at what I've done, or look at what Baal's done for me. Start crediting somebody else other than God himself. Amos shows up on the scene at the beginning of Jeroboam II's reign, and he warns them. He says, he doesn't give any really picture of hope, any picture of restoration at this point. All he's got to say is judgment's coming. If you guys keep this exploitation and this idolatry and adultery and this whole sexual revolution you got going on, if you keep up this roaring 20s, a depression is coming. So Amos is like, oh man, who studies Amos? The only people who study Amos are social justice warriors that want to just show us how bad we're doing right now. Because it says there will be a price, and God does not approve. Whereas by the time Hosea comes on the scene, it would make no sense for Amos, for example, to say, to these people who are living in the lap of luxury, to these people who have more money than they know what to do with, and so they got a Porsche and a Jaguar and a Bentley and a Rolls Royce in their driveway. He's like, it wouldn't do any good for them for Amos to say to them, there's a time coming, will you be restored, and there will be plenty of care from heaven for you. They're like, yo, we got it all. What do we need this? We don't need that. But by the time Hosea came on the scene right after Amos, things were starting to degenerate. The NASDAQ was going down. The Dow Jones was having a fall. Depression was coming. It was not just culturally and socially and spiritually corrupt. It was now economically falling apart. Even the stabilization of the government was lost. After Jeroboam, we've got 6 kings afterwards, maybe, that follow suit, that is one coup after another, an overthrow, maybe ending in assassination, lasting 6 months here, lasting 5 months over here, a year there. And so you just run into this, not even the government is stable. There's just one revolution after another revolution. And so Hosea is speaking during this time. And he says, you know why this is going on? Because you've been unfaithful to God. Return unto God. When you're reading through Hosea, keep an eye out for return. It's a theme of the book. I mean, obviously, the theme of the book is God's love, his undying love, his unbroken love, his continual love. But it's return. It's the return is the cry that God has for his people. And then also, you want to notice every time Israel is mentioned. How often is Israel mentioned? How often is Ephraim mentioned? They mean the same thing. Ephraim happened to be the leading tribe of the 10 that reigned in the north. So you'll see their name show up. Hosea taught to the northern kingdom of Israel. He mentions Judah sometimes, maybe about 15 times. It's as if to say, Judah, I want you to pay attention on what's going to happen to Israel. Because that's going to be you if you do not repent, if you do not return to me. And so Israel went first and Judah went second. All right. So the prophets have to be kind of lined up with their history that's provided in the Kings and Chronicles. you really don't get much of Israel's history in Chronicles, even though it covers the same time period as the Kings. And that's because it's more concerned with the southern kingdom. All right, so Hosea probably preached for about 60 years. So growing up, he was a good old boy. And by the way, we just had a sermon on Hosea yesterday at Messiah by Pastor Jim. So I'll put a link out there so you can link on it too, but I'll just steal some of his thunder. But it's this idea that Hosea was a good old boy growing up. And he saw what was going on, but he was a tender-hearted lay person. He's like, what can I do? And then God finally gives this passionate yet tender fella a call to be a prophet. How exciting, how thrilling to be used by God. That I could very well be the person to help turn Israel around and return them to the Lord. I'm so excited. Maybe I'll be like Isaiah, called to walk naked in the desert for 3 years to talk to the people. Maybe I'll be like Jeremiah, thrown in the pit, or Ezekiel with visions and of grandeur and odd things, and or Daniel thrown into the lion's den. He's thinking of what's my biography going to read like? What legacy am I going to leave behind? And so I'm not for sure really what he thought. We don't know much about Hosea except his dad's name was Barry. Other than that, we get some hints of it here. And so he gets the call to be a prophet, and he's excited, and he's like, I'm going to be used by God. This is so thrilling. And God says, this is what I want you to do, Hosea. I want you to get married. Well, I'm not opposed to that. I was thinking really you would send me off to Africa, but okay, I'll get married. Okay, that's good. And so Hosea, every time he went to church or the temple, however you want to say it, he would keep his eye out. Every time he went to the store, every time he went out shopping, he would keep his eye out, and he's like, that's a good gal there he's sitting on the other pew of the church. She's ministry minded. I could use a gal that's ministry minded, and we could do great things together. We're going to get married and do ministry together. Or there's a gal right there. She's pretty enough. We could have some beautiful kids. And then that gal right there, she's a can-do kind of gal. Anything that I need done, she can get done. He's looking at all these possibilities, and as he's walking down, I can't believe God's calling me to get married. It's what I wanted to do anyway. A woman catches his eye. Right there on the corner of 1st Street in Maine. Like, whoa. Like I've never seen her before. Captured the eye. Not just captured his eye, captured everybody's eye. Male, female, red and yellow, catch a fellow. She had it going. If someone even paid her more than 10 seconds glance, she'd give him a wink as if to say, yeah, I know I'm beautiful. One thing Hosea could look over and say, one thing I know this woman knows is she knows the business of men. And he's thinking, well, it's men's hearts that I'm trying to impress. It's men's hearts that I'm trying to get a hold of. Maybe. And then he dawns on him what line of work this woman is in. She's a prostitute. And he almost whips himself for having any thought towards her. Like, well, how dare I? And he wants to back away. Like, that is definitely not where God's got me going. I need to go see that holy piano player at church and hook up with her. And he's getting ready to hightail it. And then all of a sudden, a loud booming voice from heaven with subwoofers vibrating says, marry her. He looks up and he says the same thing Simon said in Luke 7 about Jesus. Lord, if you knew who this woman was, you wouldn't want me to marry her. And God said, he said this. Oh, I've just closed my Bible. Marry her. And I got a chronological Bible, which makes it even doubly hard to find out where I'm at. Go and take for yourself a wife of harlotry. You did not misunderstand me, Hosea. Oh, dear. And the Lord began to speak to Hosea, the Lord, and said, go, take yourself a wife of harlotry. You have not misunderstood me. Now, it's interesting how many scholars and commentaries try to explain away what God is calling to Hosea to. Some will say, you know what? This is just an image. It's an allegory. It's like a living parable. It didn't really happen. God would never call anybody to marry a prostitute. That's one thing we know about God, they say. Some would say, well, this woman wasn't a prostitute at the time Hosea took her to himself, that he married her. It was a beautiful wedding. She was like the town Miss Missouri queen. And so Hosea got a real winner here, because God would never ask somebody to marry a prostitute. And yet, if we want to capture the heart of God, the emotions of God, God is trying to explain here that, Hosea, what you're feeling is exactly what I'm feeling. That while we were yet sinners, Christ died for us. That kind of feeling. That's exactly what I'm asking you to do. Prophets were called to do some weird things. And yet, Hosea takes the call in his tenderness. No fire from heaven, no being fed to the lions. Instead, he gets called to marry a whore. I can hardly say the word. A harlot, a prostitute. Your life is going to be an example. Your life is going to preach my heart to this people, to my people. And so go take for yourself a wife of harlotry and have children of harlotry. Basically, it's like MTV reinvented. It's a reality TV show. Instead of keeping up with the Kardashians, we've got Let's Go with Ho-Go. You know, and so you're following Hosea, and you're following Gomer. And it is very dramatic. A lot of trials and tribulations manufactured by man. And he marries her. And this is what his children, the first thing that happens. So he went and took Gomer, the daughter of Diblaim, and she conceived and bore him a son. Then the Lord said to him, so it seems to be Hosea's boy at this time. Call his name Jezreel. For in a little while I will avenge the bloodshed of Jezreel on the house of Jehu. Jezreel is the main fruit belt of Israel, the northern kingdom. It's that valley of Armageddon. It's that luscious prairie where all the crops and the fruit are grown. So it's like, as Jezreel goes, so goes the famine of Israel. And so he's saying, I will avenge the bloodshed of Jezreel. Oh man, there's a good story associated with that. On the house of Jehu. You can read about Naboth. And bring an end to the kingdom of the house of Israel. It shall come to pass in that day that I will break the bow of Israel in the valley of Jezreel. Jezreel means scattered. And he's saying Israel is going to be scattered unless they repent, unless they return. And so Hosea, sick in the stomach, has to name his kid Jezreel. Scattered. Like, I wanted something kingly. Michael, gift of God. And I've got to say instead, scattered, almost like abandoned by God. But that's what God often calls us to be examples in the good times and bad times. And Hosea arose to the occasion. Next, he says, this time it says she conceived again and bore a daughter. It does not say bore a daughter to him. So we don't even know whose daughter this is. Hosea doesn't even know if it's his daughter. All he knows is that God said to him, call her name Lo Ruhamah, for I will no longer have mercy on the house of Israel, but I will utterly take them away. Yet I will have mercy on the house of Judah. I'll save them by the Lord their God. I will not save them by their bow or by their sword or battle or by horses or horsemen. In other words, Judah, take note. Take heed to what's happening to Israel. And know this, that you are not going now. Assyria is going to come in and gobble up Israel. It's going to scatter the people of Israel. And I'm not going to show any mercy on Israel. Judah, they could keep marching southward and devour you too. Take notice. You will be saved from the encroaching army of Assyria. But it won't be because of your great political strategy or military war room plans. It will be because of the mercy of God. And so, we don't even know whose child this is. Right now, it's no mercy. Now, when she weaned Lo Ruhamah, she conceived and bore a son. And then God said, call his name Lo Ami. You are not my people, and I will not be your God. These last two children, We don't even know if they're Hosea's. They could be the fruit of her wanderings, of any man. And God is sending a message. This merciful God, whose characteristic it is to shower mercy. He created us to give and lavish love upon us. And he says, in my restraint, even though I really don't want to, I'm going to withhold mercy so that your sin can lead to its natural end of judgment, that you might return to me, that you might come back with me. Why does Hosea have to marry? Why does God keep loving us? God is demonstrating to us the emotions that he has for his people, not just Israel, but for us as his people today. He's got that same kind of passion. Every time we turn our back on him or disregard him or choose something over him, it breaks his heart, like it would Hosea if he found his wife Gomer going after other lovers. And when well, we're going to get to chapter 2, so I'll get to save it for that. Israel is on the downward slope here. We're going from the roaring 20s, about to hit the depression, and about to hit captivity, where they are taken over by Assyria. It's interesting. As chapters 4 through 14 iterate for us the different sins that Israel was engaged in, one of the main ones is that they kept looking to the world to find out how they should be acting. Sounds like the church today. They kept looking to the world for strategies, for plans, for schemes. And they kept saying, if we could only hook up with Assyria, we'd be safe. If we could only hook up with Egypt, we'd be safe. And so they made a pact with Assyria. They ran to Assyria and said, oh, protect us. They gave tribute to them. They paid the bribery price. Protect us. And King of Syria is like, this is going to work out very well. And Hosea warned them over and over again. Amos warned them over and over again. Don't make a pact with these people. Your hope is in the Lord. It's not in your army. That's when anytime you read the word bow, that's the army. It's not in your army. It's not in your horsemen. It's not in the Iron Age. It's not in chariots. Turn to the Lord. Turn to Yahweh. And so, one thing different about Hosea over Amos. Amos did not provide much hope for restoration. Because they're the roaring 20s. They have no need to be talking about there is going to be a restoration. But Hosea, they're starting to feel it. And so he says in verse 10, yet the number of the children of Israel shall be as the sand of the sea, which cannot be measured or numbered. And it shall come to pass in the place where it was said of them, you are not my people, lo ruham, that it shall be said of them, you are the sons of the living God. Then the children of Judah and the children of Israel shall be gathered together, and appoint for themselves one head. And they shall come up out of the land, for great will be the day of Jezreel. Say to your brethren, my people, and to your sisters, mercy, ruhama, is shown. And Peter tells us in his epistle that Christ has accomplished that for us. That Christ has made us his people. That Christ has made us recipients of God's mercy. That Christ has gathered us together like a great shepherd gathers his sheep. He says to Jerusalem, oh, Jerusalem, Jerusalem, how I would have gathered you like a hen gathers her chicks. But you would not. And so he says to all the Gentiles, not just to Israel and Judah, but he says, come and gather unto me, and I will make you my body, and I shall be your head. We shall be united. We shall be one. Whatever afflicts you will afflict me. Whatever care you have will be my care. And whatever resources I have will be your resources. And so the fulfillment, the restoration that he's looking to is not, oh, we need another era of Solomon. It's looking towards Christ, who will unite everybody together. And so chapter 1 is this call of God to the prophet, not to some great preaching tour like Billy Graham, but to marry a harlot. Have children by her, not knowing whether they're yours or not, and keep on loving her. So chapter 2, we're going to look at how God ends up wooing his people back, how Hosea ends up wooing Gomer back. So stay tuned next week, same time, and we'll go with Hogo on reality TV.